Hey guys, tonight we time travel to an empire where togas are trendy statues, have better abs than you do. And believe it or not, Cabbage reigns supreme. That's right, we're diving into the curious, crunchy world of ancient Rome, where emperors didn't just rule armies or pass laws, they also obsessed over vegetables, specifically cabbage. You find yourself wandering through a Roman forum just as the sun spills soft amber light over marble columns and dusty cobblestones. Your sandals, yes, your in period accurate sandals, shuffle along beside chattering merchants and toga-clad buyers. The air is warm, and it smells faintly of Olive's grilled fish, and something more pungent. You follow your nose toward a bustling market stall, stacked high with leafy, wrinkled bundles of green cabbage. Crates of the stuff. More cabbage than any civilization should reasonably have. A squat vendor in a stained tunic is shouting praises to Jupiter and waving a head of cabbage like it's a holy relic. Good for the stomach, the skin, the soul, he hollers. Even the emperor eats this every day. You squint. Is that true? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander further past rows of fruit and amphorae of oil, and sure enough, cabbage comes up in every conversation. A boy is being scolded for not finishing his boiled greens. A soldier grumbles that the rations taste like feet and wet scrolls. A painted sign outside a bathhouse advertises cabbage oil massage for virility and clarity. And overhead, gossip floats in the humid Roman air, whispers that the emperor himself won't touch wine without a cabbage starter. Cabbage to the Romans is what kale was to Instagram in 2015, but with more social consequences. In this empire, how much cabbage you consume could say something about your politics, your class, even your moral character. You couldn't just be a casual cabbage fan, you were either committed or suspect. Historians still argue whether cabbage actually held any consistent medical benefit for the Romans, or if it simply became tradition because the right people said it loud enough. The ancient world had a funny way of turning coincidence into lifestyle. You pause near a small shrine set into a wall someone's left, an offering there, a few silver coins, and of course, a head of cabbage. Maybe it's for Fortuna, or for Cato. We'll get to him in a moment. For now, just take in this strange but oddly soothing scene. Chickens cluck beneath carts, a donkey snorts lazily beside a fig stand, and a poet sitting cross-legged in the shade is writing an ode to cabbage. You hear the line drift out. Of all that grows in sacred earth, thou art the leaf of life. You resist the urge to giggle. A woman in her 40s, fierce eyes under graying curls, offers you a slice of cabbage pie. It's warm, slightly sour, better than you expected. She tells you her father used to rub cabbage leaves on his joints before going to bed to keep the devils out. You nod politely. Somehow that explanation feels totally acceptable in this context. It turns out this isn't just a weird little phase in the vegetable aisle of history. Cabbage was one of the most discussed, debated, and downright used items in the Roman diet and medicine cabinet. And not just because it was cheap, though, let's be honest, that helped. You pass a group of schoolboys reciting lines in Greek. Their instructor bored and chewing on a cabbage stalk like a cigar drones. Know thyself, respect. Thy elders eat thy cabbage. The boys groan. Apparently, it's the third time this week. What's most fascinating is how deeply cabbage had wormed its way into Roman identity. If you were rich, it was a pre-meal necessity. If you were poor, it was dinner. If you were philosophical, it was metaphor. If you were sick, it was poultice. If you were lonely, well, maybe don't cuddle a cabbage. But everything else, fair game. You pass a crumbling fountain and catch a glimpse of a beggar rubbing cabbage juice on his chest. He notices your look and mutters, "Keeps the fevers out." You nod again. Who are you to argue with millennia of street science? And then there's the wild part. Historians believe some emperors genuinely believed that cabbage could purify the blood, strengthen the will, and prepare one's body for divine connection. We'll meet them soon. For now, you settle on a stone bench sipping from a wooden cup of cabbage broth offered by an elderly vendor. It tastes like warm regret and boiled linen. But there's a kind of comfort to it, like you've been invited into a secret club where the password is brassica. The sun lowers, torches flicker, and the night market begins. And all around you, this humble, fibrous vegetable holds court over an empire's imagination. The first time you meet Cato the Elder, he's standing barefoot in a garden patch, holding a bunch of cabbage, like it's sacred scripture. You're not sure whether to salute or bring him a salad bowl. His eyes are sharp, his tunic dusty, and he's got the look of a man who would absolutely shame you for using deodorant. Cato-born Marcus Porcius. Cato is one of those Roman senators who believes the Republic would be perfect if everyone just ate more cabbage and stopped being soft. He tells you without blinking that cabbage is the cure for everything: indigestion, insomnia, joint pain, hangovers, awkward silences at dinner parties, you name it. And the thing is, he means it. The man even wrote it down in De Agricultura, his manual on farming, household management, and aggressively rustic living. In it, Cato not only praises cabbage as food, but insists it's also medicine, beauty product, and moral compass all in one leafy package. You're ushered into his villa for a healing session. It smells like boiled earth and disappointment. A slave gently rubs cabbage juice on a soldier's infected wound, while another woman drinks fermented cabbage water to cure excessive talking. Cato watches proudly, as if expecting applause. You ask gently if there's anything cabbage can't do. Cato narrows his eyes and points to a scroll. It reads something like, "If you have a sore throat, gargle cabbage. If your legs ache, bathe in cabbage. If your wife nags, you give her cabbage. If she continues, more cabbage." Historians still argue whether Cato truly believed in the full spectrum of cabbage applications or was cleverly pushing a self-sufficient farming agenda. But there's no denying that in his world, cabbage equals virtue. Eating cabbage was more than nutrition. It was a kind of republican moral armor against foreign softness. Greek delicacies decadent, spices from the East suspicious. But cabbage was honest. Cabbage had Roman values. You shuffle through his garden under a hazy sun, listening to him ramble about how cabbage prevents hangovers if eaten raw before drinking wine. This seems like solid advice, until he starts detailing how a cabbage poultice can reverse baldness. A soldier with a cabbage wrap on his scalp passes you looking deeply embarrassed. There's even a moment where Cato suggests cabbage could prevent dreams. Yes, dreams. He insists they cloud your reason and weaken your resolve. You wonder if he says this because cabbage-based sleep is less REM and more flatulence-induced unconsciousness. The more time you spend with Cato, the more you realize he doesn't just like cabbage, he trusts it more than he trusts most people. You begin to suspect he sees leafy greens as better citizens than actual Romans. Cabbage doesn't bribe. Cabbage doesn't betray. Cabbage just grows dutifully and silently like a good soldier. Still, even in his devotion, a contradiction emerges. Cato, the ultimate Roman traditionalist, probably exaggerated Cabbage's virtues to prove a point less about the vegetable and more about what it represented: discipline, frugality, and health by homegrown effort. Modern scholars have pored over his writings and still debate whether his cabbage obsession was literal or symbolic. Was it medical advice or moral propaganda? Was he healing or just humble bragging about his rustic life? You don't get to ask because suddenly Cato is peeling a raw cabbage leaf and pressing it against your temple. For clarity, he says, you're not sure if he means mental or spiritual clarity. Maybe both, maybe neither. But you nod, because at this point resisting cabbage is clearly futile. As evening falls, the garden rustles with soft winds and the slow rustle of leaves. Cato walks away muttering about how the youth no longer eat cabbage with enough gratitude. You look at your reflection in a bowl of cabbage broth. You feel, not exactly healed, but certainly marinated in ancient wisdom. Dinner with Julius Caesar. So here you are in the kitchens of a Roman general's villa, specifically the man who would become dictator for life, Julius Caesar. And things are hectic. Not in a modern, the souffle's collapsing way, but in a more ancient, sweaty, and frankly, cabbage-forward sort of chaos. You can practically feel the steam clinging to your skin as cooks in stained tunics dash about stuffing leaves into clay pots and muttering about battle preparation. You're not here for a feast, not really. You're here because Caesar, as it turns out, has a thing for cabbage. Or more precisely, his advisors think he should have a thing for cabbage. Why? Because Cato the Elder, that grumpy old senator from the last section, declared it to be the supreme Roman cure-all. And Caesar, who's about to march into Gaul or Britain or somewhere with an unpronounceable river, is being told that cabbage will fortify his stomach, sharpen his mind, and possibly make his leg hair grow faster. Historians still argue whether Caesar himself actually liked the stuff or merely tolerated it while rolling his eyes internally. Tonight's menu: cabbage boiled with cumin, cabbage mashed with vinegar and honey, cabbage hidden inside sausage. One poor kitchen slave is even braiding raw cabbage into decorative plate rims, as if Julius is going to look down and think, how charming. A vegetal wreath. You lean closer to the steam and catch a whiff of the boiled variety. It's pungent. Not exactly war-fueling. But Roman medicinal theory wasn't known for subtlety. Cabbage was thought to dry up excess moisture in the body. An ancient explanation for everything from phlegm to mood swings. Cabbage makes you feel dry, and dry equals strong. By that logic, Caesar might soon be as emotionally stable as a granite pillar. A scroll unrolled on a counter near the hearth lists Caesar's pre-battle nourishment, a heavily guarded ritual. There's barley wine and, yep, cabbage paste. You don't eat the paste. You smear it on your chest. Warmed. For intestinal armor, apparently. One soldier swore by it. Another got a rash. That's medicine for you. Julius himself enters the kitchen briefly. Tall, intense, busy. He doesn't linger. He's got places to conquer and calendars to inspire. But a cook manages to whisper, "Sir, we've prepared the cabbage for strength." Caesar gives a non-committal grunt. It's the Roman version of cool thanks. And then he's gone. Probably to deal with a Senate crisis, or sharpen a spear with his teeth. Still, There's this unspoken understanding. If cabbage makes the man a little more invincible, why not lean in? And so you watch as bundles of leafy greens are packed carefully into travel rations, salted and sealed. Caesar's soldiers, famously hardy, were expected to carry their own food. But cabbage was special. Its strong odor disguised other smells, which made it ideal for long marches and unpleasant wounds. One soldier seated near the back door of the kitchen pulls you aside. He speaks low, conspiratorially. The trick, he says, is to eat the cabbage before the wine, not after. Keeps the stomach sealed like a vault. He pauses, narrows his eyes. Or so Cato said. I think he was drunk. You nod wisely. You've now learned that Julius Caesar, hero of Rome, builder of empires, stabby of epic proportions, may have walked into his greatest battles with cabbage juice on his breath and leaves in his satchel. There's something oddly human about that. But before you drift too far into admiration, remember, this is still cabbage we're talking about. It didn't win any flavor awards, not even back then. One ancient poet described it as a leaf both noble and grim, a little like Caesar himself, perhaps. The final course of the night is brought out cabbage-stuffed dormice. No, not a joke. Fat roasted mice with cabbage inside. You politely decline. Outside, the twilight deepens over Rome, and the smell of steamed greens rises like a fog into the evening air. Somewhere beyond the hills, drums of war are beating. But here in this warm kitchen of copper pots, and ambition cabbage is the true general. And tomorrow it marches with Caesar. The medicinal leaf. You've barely finished chewing your last bite of boiled cabbage before you're dragged quite willingly. It turns out into a dim Roman clinic that smells overwhelmingly of vinegar sweat and something oddly herbaceous. Welcome to the realm of Roman folk medicine, where cabbage isn't just a side dish. It's a full-blown therapeutic lifestyle. The healer, a stoic-looking man with ink-stained fingers and a toga splattered in some past patient's optimism, greets you with a nod. He introduces himself as Aulus, a man of great belief and surprisingly few teeth. Cabbage, he says, eyes wide with conviction, is the cornerstone of all health. A divine leaf. More reliable than Mercury, and less judgmental than Jupiter. You're shown a variety of treatments. Got a sore knee, cabbage leaf poultice. Insomnia, cabbage juice at dusk. Love problems. Rub cabbage water on your chest while facing the moon. This place is either a medical wonderland or a salad bar that got way out of hand. The Romans had their version of wellness influencers too, just with more linen and fewer hashtags. Many of their physicians relied on De Agricultura, Cato, the elder's austere farming manual, which claimed cabbage could cure everything from headaches to hangovers, and most importantly, digestive issues. Romans were very into their digestion, maybe too into it. You watch as a legionnaire grunting in pain is told to strap a boiled cabbage leaf to his foot. No explanation, just trust the cabbage. Another patient is given cabbage wine fermented for weeks and allegedly strong enough to kill parasites and your will to live. But then comes the showstopper. A woman, pale and moaning, is laid down on a straw-stuffed mattress. Aulus approaches solemn, then places a single cabbage leaf gently on her forehead. The room goes quiet, save for the occasional chirp of a street hawker shouting about anchovies outside. This is serious. Cabbage is happening. Oddly enough, some of this wasn't entirely nonsense. Cabbage does contain anti-inflammatory compounds and vitamin C. In fact, modern studies have found that cabbage leaves might help reduce swelling in certain conditions. But historians still argue whether these ancient applications were truly medicinal or just the result of cabbage being the only thing on hand that wasn't on fire, spoiled, or worshipped? Then again, Romans were deeply into symbolic healing. The act of applying something believed to be holy or potent mattered as much as the object itself. So while it may look like someone's grandma lost a salad and slapped it on your thigh in Roman eyes, you were being honored with sacred vegetal wisdom. You wander into a back room labeled herbaria, where other plants reside: basil, hyssop, garlic, but they all seem secondary. There's even a little statue of Asclepius, god of medicine, holding not his usual serpent staff, but a carved cabbage. Someone clearly got creative, or very drunk. One of the most curious treatments is cabbage used for vision. Yes, cabbage eye drops. You watch a trembling apprentice attempt to drip cabbage juice into the eye of an elderly man who flinches like a startled cat. Apparently, this is supposed to clarify the inner truth. What he probably sees is double vision and a need for a new doctor. Still, the cabbage loyalists are everywhere. You overhear an elderly couple discussing their grandchild's colic and the cabbage-based incense they burn to soothe it. There's even a rumor going around that a high priestess once brought a dead bird back to life with nothing but steamed cabbage and prayer. It flew straight into a pillar afterward, someone mutters, but still. You notice that cabbage rituals bleed into spiritual practice too. A midwife swears that laying cabbage leaves in the corners of a room during childbirth keeps away evil spirits and also neutralizes bad smells. Multi-purpose, as always. Despite the leafy fervor, not everyone buys into it. One bearded scholar mutters under his breath that cabbage worship is a symptom of intellectual decay. He is then promptly shushed by a cabbage vendor passing by. But truth be told, in a world without antibiotics, thermometers or basic hand soap cabbage offered something anything to believe in. You begin to feel it yourself, this irrational comfort, in the idea that something so humble, so leafy, might hold the answer to life's woes. As you step back into the sunlight, a boy hands you a small woven pouch. Inside 2 dried cabbage leaves and a sprig of rosemary. For good sleep, he says. And you think, well, it can't hurt. Claudius is not what you expect in an emperor. He stammers, he limps, and he's often the butt of palace jokes. But when it comes to cabbage, the man is unstoppable. You're seated across the table from him now, in a grand marble hall with golden oil lamps swaying gently above. The servants shuffle by with trays of roasted meats, honey-glazed fruits, and steaming bowls of yes-boiled cabbage, which Claudius accepts like it's fine wine. He waves off the dormice stuffed with pine nuts. He declines the grilled eel. More brassica, he insists. You nod politely, pretending to enjoy your own sludgy scoop, though it tastes like warm paper towels dipped in seawater. Claudius's obsession wasn't just about taste. He believed cabbage could preserve health, sharpen the mind, and even prevent hangovers, useful, given the endless banquets around here. Historians still argue whether this devotion came from genuine belief, or whether Claudius was subtly mocking the Senate's growing snobbery over imported delicacies like flamingo tongues and saffron-dusted fish. Either way, he elevated cabbage to imperial glory. He even issued directives that it be grown in every official Roman garden from Sicily to the northern outposts in Britannia. Imagine being a soldier on the cold frontier, dreaming of warm bread or cured ham, and getting a cabbage shipment from the emperor himself. Morale boost debatable. In Claudius's personal notebooks, those that weren't mysteriously lost after his suspicious death, you'd have found jottings on cabbage yields, soil preferences, even weather-based leaf predictions. One fringe theory from a modern scholar claims he may have secretly crossbred varieties aiming for the elusive imperial cabbage that never browned or wilted. No evidence supports this. Still, it's a nice image, the ruler of Rome hunched over dirt in his royal tunic, whispering words of encouragement to a leaf. You lean back in your cushioned chair, now watching him describe in great detail how cabbage cured his headaches, indigestion, and once he swears brought back a lost memory from childhood. "It was my nursemaid," he says dreamily. "She sang a song about beans." He pauses. "But it smelled of cabbage." So maybe it was cabbage. The palace chef, well, one of the 30 enters, wiping sweat from his brow. "My lord, shall we prepare the dish for tomorrow's Senate luncheon?" Claudius perks up like a kid on his birthday. "The 12-hour pickled cabbage stew with goose fat and wild fennel," he says. "Make sure the senators feel it." Ah, yes, the cabbage diplomacy strategy. You've heard about this. He believed that certain dishes would subtly sway senatorial votes. If a senator's gut felt soothed and warm, he might be more inclined to support tax reforms or infrastructure bills. One historic vote on aqueduct maintenance passed only after a lunch featuring cabbage soup with chickpeas and garlic, leading many to nickname it the bill that smelled like lunch. Claudius also loved storytelling around the dinner table. Tonight, he regales you with the tale of how cabbage leaves helped ancient warriors heal bruises and fend off infections. He insists that cabbage bandages saved entire legions in Gaul. "Wrap it tight," he says, miming a winding motion up his arm. It draws out the corruption. You glance to your left. One of the palace guards, perhaps overzealous in his loyalty, has cabbage leaves taped to his forearms and thighs. He looks exhausted, but also like he might survive a catapult blast. And then Claudius does something unexpected. He stands, quietly, solemnly. He lifts his goblet and toasts to the cabbage. Humble, healing, honest. The entire room freezes, unsure if this is satire or sacred moment. A senator giggles but quickly covers his mouth when Claudius glares. This, you realize, is no longer a joke. Under Claudius, cabbage has become a political tool, a medical crutch, a spiritual symbol, and a national obsession. In every sense, it's now imperial policy. And you're sitting at ground zero of the Roman vegetable revolution. You're reclining now on a cushioned stone bench, no less at a lavish Roman banquet. The air smells of roasted dormice, honey-glazed ham, and of course, cabbage. Lots of it. The host is fabulously wealthy, obnoxiously perfumed, and already 2 goblets of Falernian wine deep. He leans over, slurring just slightly, and insists you try the cabbage dish. Why? Because he says with a serious face and a mouth full of it, it helps with the vomiting. You smile politely. Surely he misspoke. But then, the guest to your left, a sharp-tongued widow with 3 ex-husbands and a suspiciously youthful complexion, chimes in to explain, no, you don't understand. Cabbage isn't just allowed before a Roman feast. It's encouraged. Practically mandatory. See if you eat enough boiled cabbage before the real gluttony begins, it prepares your stomach, loosens things up, greases the digestive wheels, if you will. And here you were thinking appetizers were supposed to be appetizing. This brings us to one of the more peculiar habits of upper-crust Romans' deliberate vomiting. Yes, that old rumor. And while the truth is far more nuanced than toga-clad gluttons hurling mid-meal to make room for seconds, there was a cultural precedent for gastric manipulation. Historians still argue whether vomiting was actually a widespread accepted norm or just exaggerated by Roman satirists like Seneca and Petronius. Either way, the cabbage had a role in the ritual. Picture it. A reclining noble dips slices of cabbage into vinegar, slurps them down, and then reclines farther, belly bloating like a wine jug in the sun. If things go as planned, the cabbage stimulates digestion. If things go too well, let's just say the vomitorium, which, to clarify, was never a real bathroom, but simply an exit corridor in theaters, might be a little misnamed. But hey, at least it was a controlled purge with dignity. And napkins, probably. The elite obsession with this pre-meal cabbage ritual was so intense that cabbage dishes were often served at elite feasts, with little ceremony, just a wink and a nudge. Even the famously decadent Emperor Nero was said to have engaged in digestive resets, though he was less discreet about it. Suetonius, who was basically the Roman version of a celebrity gossip blogger, mentions that Nero had an iron stomach and indulged wildly. Whether cabbage was part of his routine or not is unclear, but plenty of scholars believe it's likely. You glance around the room now, and there's a kind of knowing camaraderie. The cabbage eaters wink at each other, their lips slick with olive oil and pickled herb juices. There's laughter, clinking of goblets, someone tooting on a pan flute in the corner. A servant glides past you with a bowl of something pungent cabbage. Of course, this time baked in goat cheese and honey, and the air thickens. You're not sure whether you're more full or simply stunned. And the cabbage isn't just in the starters, it sneaks into every course. A fermented cabbage chutney with grilled eel. A minced lamb and cabbage stew thickened with spelt. Even dessert, yes, dessert features sugared cabbage crisps served atop honey custard. You tell yourself this is normal. You smile and chew. You are now a cabbage person. Meanwhile, over in the kitchens, things are less glamorous. Slaves and cooks are frantically boiling, chopping, crushing, and seasoning vast bundles of cabbage heads, many of which were picked green from the imperial gardens just that morning. One cook complains loudly about the foul stink of honor as the cabbage stew simmers for the 6th hour. Back at the table, your host lifts a golden fork and taps his goblet with flourish. He's about to toast. You brace yourself for poetry, for an ode to Venus or Apollo. But instead, he bellows, "To cabbage, guardian of the gut, friend of the festive." You nod along, careful not to laugh. The woman next to you burps delicately and murmurs, "Praise be to brassicas." And there it is, the underlying truth. Romans were obsessed with maintaining balance. In their diets, their humors, their social standing. And cabbage was the humble plant that promised to do all three. It wasn't exotic or rare, it was domestic, familiar, and gloriously efficient. The philosopher Pliny the Elder wrote that cabbage could cure drunkenness, restore wits, and soothe the liver. In fairness, he also claimed that you could plant garlic by simply swearing at it while burying it under a full moon. But still, his cabbage affection stands. Cabbage to Pliny was essentially the Roman equivalent of electrolytes and aspirin. Now, not everyone in Rome agreed. Some physicians, those high-minded types from Alexandria and Athens, considered the cabbage craze a bit unscientific. They preferred figs or pomegranate syrups, or even good old-fashioned fasting. But for the average gourmand of Rome, the logic was simple: better to fill up on cabbage early than to pass out into your neighbor's quail eggs an hour into the meal. And yet, just as your stomach begins to ache from the imagined feast, the atmosphere of the banquet shifts. Lamps burn lower. The musicians switch to gentler tones. People begin to recline, their cheeks flushed and robes loosened. Someone sighs, "I shouldn't have had that third helping of cabbage." Another whispers, "You'll be fine. Just lean left and think calm thoughts." And so, you do too. Lean back, Let the scent of herbs and boiled brassicas swirl around you and allow your imaginary Roman stomach to settle. Whatever comes next, one thing is clear. You've survived a full Roman banquet, cabbage and all. You ease into a polished marble bench just outside the Curia, Julia, the Senate house of ancient Rome. The midday sun glints off togas, sandals, shuffle on limestone, and somewhere nearby, someone is definitely frying cabbage in olive oil. Again, you're not surprised anymore. By now you've smelled cabbage baked, boiled, bruised into poultices, and slathered over various body parts. But this is different. This is political. You've stumbled into a session of the Senate today's topic, whether the public treasury should subsidize state-funded cabbage for the sick and elderly. Yes, seriously. As you duck behind a pillar and listen in, a particularly theatrical senator in an absurdly perfumed tunic raises his hand and declares, "I shall not breathe another breath of cabbage gas in the forum." Everyone nods, some holding handkerchiefs over their faces. The cabbage backlash has begun. It turns out the combination of medicinal cabbage, overly enthusiastic cabbage-based meals, and the Roman love of communal bathing has led to an olfactory disaster. In places like the baths of Caracalla, folks are boiling themselves like vegetables and reeking of fermented leaves. Even the marble seems offended. One senator recalls how his nephew slathered his arm in cabbage leaves for a rash and cleared the entire atrium within minutes. Another senator argues that cabbage stench is a sign of healing and fortitude. If Rome cannot endure the smell of strength, he says solemnly, how shall we endure the Gauls? Historians still argue whether these debates were real or exaggerated later in satire. There are records suggesting cabbage subsidies were discussed during Emperor Claudius's reign, especially when food scarcity hit poor districts. But how serious it got? That's hazy. A fringe scholar named Titus Plintonius, a favorite among cabbage historians, which is a very niche crowd, wrote in the 3rd century about the Great Smelling, a 2-week period when Rome's upper markets were blanketed in cabbage vapor due to a wellness fad pushed by imperial physicians. Allegedly, it led to riots near the Colosseum when someone tossed a rotting cabbage into a vendor's stall and triggered a brawl. But back in your current Senate session, emotions run high. Perfumed senators fidget. One even suggests cabbage permits documents that would legally regulate who can consume or apply cabbage in public spaces. That idea gets way more support than expected. And then, of course, someone brings up the theater. Apparently, patrons have been complaining that theater-goers smelling like boiled cabbage are ruining the acoustics of tragedies. One actor slipped on a slick of cabbage oil near the stage and declared, "The gods weep," before breaking character and storming off. You try not to laugh, but honestly, it's all a bit much. Yet, here's where things turn unexpectedly sweet. Amid the complaints and farce, an elderly senator stands supported by 2 aides. His voice is soft, a little crackly. He tells the room how cabbage compresses healed his gout, and how his daughter now uses fermented cabbage juice to treat her migraines. He shares how cabbage soup sustained entire neighborhoods when grain deliveries were delayed. Suddenly, the room falls silent. You glance around. No one's rolling their eyes. Cabbage may stink, but to many, it's also survival. The vote is called. After dramatic finger-pointing, toga-twirling, and one awkward argument about radishes, a compromise passes. The state will continue supporting cabbage cultivation. But anyone bringing cabbage to public baths must rinse first in scented water. As you leave the forum, you pass a scribe chiseling the debate into a wax tablet. The heading, De odore brassicae, on the smell of cabbage. The city exhales. Or maybe it burps. Hard to tell. You're standing in the shade of a cracked marble archway near one of Rome's louder public forums, the kind that smells faintly of sweaty tunics and spiced lentils. Just past the market stalls, a heated argument is in full swing, drawing a crowd. One side, waving bundles of leafy green with great dramatic flair, proudly defends the honor of cabbage. The other side, equally passionate garlic enthusiasts, gripping bulbs like sacred amulets. You poor sleeper in sandals have wandered right into one of the strangest cultural food feuds the Roman Empire has ever known. At the heart of this culinary civil war is an issue surprisingly close to the Roman palate and the nose. Cabbage, with its crisp bitterness and assumed curative powers, had been riding high on a wave of elite approval. Garlic, pungent and earthy, was seen as food of the laborers, robust, sweaty, and undeniably useful for fighting off infections and in-laws. So, of course, class conflict had to evolve into a vegetable battle. You slide onto a stone bench beside an elderly man who offers you roasted chickpeas and mutters, "They used to just argue about taxes." The crowd before you grows louder, and then a cabbage champion steps forward, a young man in a toga that's a little too clean, probably a patrician's son. He holds up a steaming bowl and declares, "Cabbage was eaten by the gods before war." Garlic stinks like defeat. The garlic camp gasps in theatrical unison. A woman in a rough wool tunic responds sharply, "Tell that to the garlic poultice that saved my husband's leg in Gaul." The thing is, both sides have a point. Cabbage was highly respected in Roman medicinal circles. Soldiers were encouraged to eat it before drinking, believing it would keep them from getting too intoxicated. But garlic. It was practically the Roman ibuprofen. Roman physicians prescribed it for digestion, respiratory issues, and as a general health tonic. Gladiators ate garlic before battle, trusting it to give strength and speed. So now, standing amid the shouting match, you realize this isn't just about dinner. It's about identity status, even how people interpreted strength itself. Historians still argue whether cabbage truly held such a monopoly over the Roman elite's affections, or if the praise we read now is more a reflection of a few powerful fans like Cato and Claudius, rather than a full-blown empire-wide obsession. But the debate made its way into daily life regardless, and you're witnessing the leafy fallout. A curious side effect of this divide is how food vendors play both sides. A nearby stall sells allium cabbage pie, a sly diplomatic gesture wrapped in flaky crust. You buy a slice, it's warm, soft, surprisingly good, and eavesdrop on an impromptu rap battle between two boys, each defending their family's favored food. Cabbage cools your bile, one raps. Garlic keeps out wiles, the other snaps back. A man with a lute starts playing along. A Roman satire from the poet Martial even pokes at this kind of daily drama, complaining that he can't eat a simple meal without being told the political implications of his vegetable choices. "I came for dinner," he moans, not dietary reform. It's that cheeky commentary that helps scholars today understand just how deeply food was tied to everything from politics to personal virtue. But beyond the humor lies a real tension. Cabbage, associated with restraint and intellect, became a tool for the elite to distance themselves from the working class, who ironically had discovered most of its benefits in the first place. Garlic, once the medicine of the people, was viewed by snobbier Romans as uncouth, especially for its smell. If someone on the Senate floor reeked of garlic, it was practically a political scandal. Still, you're not immune to the charm of both. You pass by a bathhouse, offering an herbal steam of harmony, promising to infuse you with both cabbage and garlic essence for balance. You decline politely, but make a mental note to gift it to that friend who talks during your naps. As you wander back through the square, the smell of roasted vegetables fills the air. A street performer hands out leaves of both cabbage and garlic, tied to tiny scrolls of ancient proverbs. Yours reads, "Cabbage soothes the stomach, garlic stirs the soul." Pick your hero. A good reminder that even in a world ruled by emperors, sometimes it's the contents of your soup bowl that ignite the fiercest debates. And as you drift past a fresco showing a garlic-wielding gladiator squaring off against a cabbage-armored centurion, you can't help but smile. The empire may rise and fall, but the food fight's eternal. You step into a marble-tiled atrium glowing with torchlight and perfumed air. The scent is strange part, lavender part, something far more fermented. A low splash echoes from a back chamber. A slave glides past holding a steaming bowl, carefully balanced on her fingertips. She nods for you to follow. Tonight, you've been invited to the private spa of Empress Agrippina the Younger. She is many things, mother of Nero, power broker of Rome, and, most curiously, the face of cabbage-based beauty. Because while emperors chugged cabbage to purge the soul, Agrippina took a more topical approach. Literally, as you pass through silk curtains and soft fountains, you find her reclined on a stone chaise, a cabbage leaf plastered delicately across her cheek, like a high-end face mask. She's humming something vaguely menacing. An attendant is brushing her feet with mashed sauerkraut. This is no joke. Roman elite women believed that fermented cabbage juice tightened the skin-reduced age spots and oddly encouraged docility in one's rivals. You squint at a tray beside her. There's a paste of boiled cabbage, crushed pearls, and donkey milk. Ah, yes, donkey milk, always the Roman luxury go-to. One jar is labeled for elbows. She opens one eye. "You'll look younger by morning," she says. You doubt it. Mainstream Roman medical texts think Pliny the Elder's natural history actually do list cabbage as a skin tonic. Pliny went on at length about how cabbage poultices could calm the face, which honestly sounds like something your skincare-obsessed roommate might say today. Whether it worked is another story, but Agrippina didn't skimp on the ritual. Historians still argue whether this cabbage beauty craze was grounded in actual dermatological logic or just a symptom of imperial superstition mixed with wealth-fueled boredom. Possibly both. Roman women had a thing for rituals, and if your spa day didn't involve at least one sacrificial goose or poultice, were you even glowing? You're guided through the Empress's treatment chambers. In one corner, women lie quietly with cabbage compresses on their temples to soothe female hysteria. In another, long strips of cabbage are tied around upper arms like leafy bangles meant to draw out unkind thoughts. And here's where it gets even weirder. Some elite ladies, those with a flair for mysticism, claimed cabbage could absorb the spirit of envy. At fancy banquets, they'd wear miniature cabbage amulets under their togas. Others simply crushed raw cabbage into wine, dabbed it behind the ears, and hoped no one noticed the scent. You imagine that working only if your guests were already drunk. But Agrippina, she was ahead of the curve. She had fresh cabbage delivered daily from her personal farm outside Antium grown. Under lunar conditions, she swore gave the leaves maximum softness. Her facialist once told a senator's wife that cabbage remembers what your skin forgets. That doesn't mean anything, but it sure sounds important. The steam rises in the spa. You're handed a bowl of warm cabbage broth with honey and poppy. For inner glow, the attendant whispers. You sip politely and immediately regret it. It tastes like warm regret. One wall displays portraits of empresses past. Julia Domna, Livia, Poppaea. Some wear garlands of grapevine, others of laurel. Agrippina's portrait, though hers is made entirely of overlapping cabbage leaves. The artist had clearly committed. In the background, a trio of harpists play a soft, looping melody. A poet begins reciting verses about a woman so beautiful that her enemies melted like butter in the Roman sun, and lo, her cheek was kissed by cabbage dew. You raise an eyebrow. Someone claps gently. You've clearly wandered into a new kind of cult. Even Roman men got in on it. Some generals returning from the provinces requested cabbage-infused oils to be rubbed on their scalps, believing it improved memory and sharpened dream clarity. Spoiler, it did not. But the placebo was strong. Modern dermatologists today might squint at all this. But let's be honest, cabbage is full of antioxidants, anti-inflammatory properties, and some nice vitamin K. Was it science? No. Was it soothing? For the ancient Romans? Yes, absolutely. And in a time without retinol, sometimes cabbage had to be enough. You glance around one more time. The atmosphere is hushed, ritualistic. The marble reflects candlelight in wavy patterns. Somewhere water gurgles quietly from a lion-headed spout. You can't help but think this might be the most luxurious Cabbage Day spa in history. And for Agrippina, that was the point. It wasn't just about skincare. It was about status. Cabbage said, I have power, I have gardens, and I am deeply hydrated. You wonder briefly if the Empress would survive a Sephora sale. You rise, cheeks slightly sticky from steam, and prepare to leave the chamber. Agrippina smiles faintly, her face still half-leafed. Remember, she says, glow is power. You nod and slink off toward the corridor, the scent of pickled greens trailing gently behind you, like a whisper. You find yourself walking alongside a long, dusty Roman road, the kind that stretches endlessly across the empire, like a line drawn by a god, with a steady hand and a good pair of sandals. The sun beats down, cicadas drone, and the scent in the air isn't exactly roses. It's the unmistakable perfume of boiled cabbage. That's right. Cabbage. Again. You squint ahead and see a group of Roman soldiers setting up camp, their red tunics clinging to sun-slicked backs as they erect their temporary shelter. But what catches your attention isn't the spears or armor. It's the giant copper pot bubbling over a fire, releasing thick steam and an earthy, familiar aroma. Turns out, you've stumbled into a castra, a Roman military camp, and Cabbage somehow has followed you here, too. You make your way toward the open mess area, where a grizzled centurion with more scars than teeth is stirring the pot like it owes him money. He glances at you. Ah, you smell it, too. Traveler. He grunts, keeps the guts clean and the mind clearer. Here in the Roman legions, cabbage isn't just food. It's strategy. It lines the guts of men who are about to march into Gaul or Dacia or some other place where pointy things fly at alarming speeds. Roman generals like Marcus Agrippa believed in the power of a steady diet. Lots of legumes, vinegar, and yes, good old cabbage. Why? Because cabbage was cheap, travel-friendly, and, in their minds, medicinal. The ancient Roman writer Pliny the Elder even insisted that soldiers who consumed cabbage regularly were less likely to get wounded, or, if wounded, healed faster. Historians still argue whether that's the cabbage talking or just a wishful fantasy brewed in a pot of desperation and garlic. But in these camps, no one questions it. They eat, they sweat, and when their feet are blistered from weeks of marching, they boil cabbage leaves, slap them on their skin, and swear the sting fades faster. You peek into the soldier's kit, and spot dried cabbage wedges stacked like green leather coins next to salted pork and hard bread. A soldier nearby offers you one biting into his with the enthusiasm of someone chewing a boot. "Better than Gall's cheese," he says through a grimace. That may or may not be true, but you nod politely. One tent over the medicus, the Army's version of a doctor-barber, and bloodletting enthusiast lays out a collection of instruments beside you, guessed it, a bowl of steamed cabbage. Apparently, wounds are first washed in vinegar, then wrapped in wilted cabbage leaves, which are believed to pull out infection and excess heat. Whether or not the leaves do anything more than stain the linen bandages is up for debate, but morale matters, and cabbage is a morale booster. At the communal baths, yes, the Romans insisted on public hygiene. Even during campaigns, you notice something else: cabbage soap. More accurately, it's animal fat mixed with crushed cabbage and lavender. You inhale. It smells ambitious. But the soldiers lather it up like luxury lotion. "Keeps the lice guessing," one of them mutters with a wink. Further down the encampment, a few off-duty troops are gathered around a fire telling stories. One claims that in Germania, a single cabbage leaf saved his life. "An arrow hit me in the thigh. Right, I slapped a cabbage leaf on it. Slept on it. Next day gone." The others nod, not because they believe him, but because every army needs its legends. Of course, cabbage's real power among soldiers is its predictability. Unlike some questionable meats and dodgy local grains, cabbage won't surprise you. It won't make you see gods in your vomit or leave you sprinting toward the nearest latrine. It's bland, reliable, like an old mule or a decent sword. You sit on a log watching the men patch their sandals, oil their gear. In the quiet between laughs and clangs, it strikes you this isn't just food. Cabbage is ritual. It's the through line between battles and rest, between cities and wilderness. The soldiers are out here building roads, policing borders, expanding empire. But beneath all that ambition is a pot of cabbage, quietly bubbling away like the empire's heartbeat. Historians have long debated whether the cabbage-centric diet had any long-term benefits for Roman legions' famed discipline and endurance. Was it the vitamins, the fiber, the anti-inflammatory myths, or just a shared superstition that gave starving homesick men something solid to believe in? As night falls over the camp and the scent of smoldering fires mingles with the last notes of brassica steam, you curl up under a borrowed wool blanket, surrounded by the gentle sounds of armor creaking and men snoring. Someone's still chewing slowly, thoughtfully in the dark. Cabbage. Again. You're barely through wiping off the sticky remains of that cabbage facial when a whisper reaches your ear in a provincial Roman bathhouse. A trader from the east leans close, wafting a spicy, unfamiliar aroma, half incense, half fermented something, and says, "You haven't seen cabbage until you've seen it worshipped." You raise an eyebrow more out of politeness than curiosity, but he grins like he knows something you don't. Next thing you know, you're bumping along a dusty road toward a Roman outpost in Syria. You pass olive groves, ruined aqueducts, and goats with more authority than most centurions. It's sunset by the time you arrive in a strange little town nestled between low hills and fragrant herb fields. The people here speak Latin with a syrupy twist and wear robes stained green with what you're now realizing is cabbage dye. They call it Brassica Divina, the divine leaf. At the edge of town, there's a shrine. Not to Jupiter, not to Venus, but to a carved head of cabbage painted lovingly in vibrant greens and framed by polished stones. A young acolyte in cabbage-dyed linen rings a tiny bronze bell, and places offerings of wine coins and more cabbage at the altar. You blink. Is this serious? Oh, yes, deeply. This is the local cult of the Verdant One, a movement that sprang up during the reign of Antoninus Pius. Historians still argue whether it began as a practical agricultural ritual or as satire that spiraled out of control. One theory suggests that soldiers homesick for Italian diets started treating cabbage as sacred to comfort themselves. Another points to an overzealous herbalist who convinced half the town that cabbage improved spiritual clarity. Either way, the faith stuck like stewed cabbage on a bronze pan. You attend one of their ceremonies. The priest chants softly while wafting steam from a pot of boiling greens. Worshippers wave leaves in slow synchrony, murmuring phrases like, "May the veins be firm, the scent be strong, the spirit be cleansed." The evening ends with a shared meal of raw cabbage goat cheese and honey, an acquired taste, to say the least. But it's not just Syria. As the empire sprawled, cabbage picked up some truly weird fan clubs. In Rome and Egypt, cabbage was thought to open the mind to divine dreams. Temples sold night salads made from leaves picked under full moons. You try one, and while no gods visit your dreams, you do wake up clutching a sandal that's not yours. Still counts as mystical rite. Meanwhile, in Gaul, cabbage became tied to fertility. Brides wore garlands of green leaves, and get this, some believed placing cabbage under the bed on your wedding night guaranteed twins. You peek into one of these rustic wedding huts and catch an anxious groom sniffing the floor, muttering about potency. You slowly back away. Even the eastern provinces added their spin. In Cappadocia, cabbage was fed to sacred geese believed to be messengers between mortals and gods. The logic, no one knows, not even the priests. But you do see a goose in a cabbage crown being paraded through town square like royalty. So apparently someone's taking notes. Of course, back in Rome, not everyone was thrilled about these leafy litanies. Satirists grumbled that cabbage worship was a distraction from proper reverence for Jupiter. One grumpy senator even introduced a bill, Lex de Excessiva Brassica, trying to limit religious use of vegetables. It failed. Mostly because no one wanted to be remembered as the guy who outlawed salads. The cabbage cults continued quietly for decades, drifting between reverence and ridicule. Eventually, they mellowed into folklore stories told to children about the leaf that healed hearts and opened minds. By now, you're seated beside a flickering lamp in the home of an old provincial widow. She offers you tea and softly recounts how her great-grandmother claimed cabbage could ward off nightmares if placed under a child's pillow. You smile politely, but when you lie down that night, you do catch yourself checking for a green lump under your head, just in case. You duck beneath a faded crimson awning and step into a packed Roman taberna, part tavern, part cafeteria, and part open mic night, apparently. The air smells like olive oil, anchovies, and something a little fermented. A few overexcited customers are already waving bunches of wilted cabbage at the low wooden stage, where a skinny man in a worn tunic dramatically clears his throat and launches into a poem. "O cabbage, thou leafy liar, who promised health but gave me fire, of bowels, of breath, of marriage woe, may Neptune drag thee down below." A burst of laughter erupts from the audience, though the man's mother looks unimpressed from the corner, slowly munching a baked onion. You've wandered straight into a cabbage satire night, where Rome's poets, playwrights, and amateur gossip mongers come to roast the empire's leafy obsession. Think of it as ancient Rome's version of stand-up comedy, except with more olives and fewer filters. You shuffle toward a bench, squeezing between a merchant, smelling strongly of garum, and a toga-clad man already 3 cups of wine in. On the wall behind the stage, a crude chalk sign reads, "Tonight's theme, brassicas and betrayal." The speaker continues now ranting about Claudius's cabbage campaign. He ate them boiled. He ate them raw. With every law he slipped in slaw. And senators with cabbage breath voted for things they never read. It's funny because it's true. Roman elites from Cicero to Seneca complained about the overpowering trend of turning every philosophical dinner into a cabbage lecture. Some even claimed it clouded judgment, or worse, clogged the drains of the bathhouses. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman satire, especially during the early imperial period, was one of the sharpest social commentaries available. Writers like Juvenal and Martial didn't shy away from mocking excess, whether it was in politics luxury or obsessive vegetable worship. You sip a lukewarm herbal drink, perhaps made with cabbage stems, and stale honey and eavesdrop on a younger satirist at the next table, scribbling on a wax tablet. He murmurs, "What rhymes with leafy tyranny? Beefy epiphany." You lean back, letting the laughter and low hum of conversation settle around you. This place is more than a comedy den. It's therapy. Romans used humor to cope with empire-wide anxieties, plagues, taxes, sudden changes in fashion, and yes, unexpected gas caused by overenthusiastic cabbage feasting. A short woman with wild hair takes the stage next. She raises a pickled cabbage leaf overhead and deadpans, "Men say cabbage gives you strength. But if that were true, my ex would have conquered Gaul with a salad fork." Cue thunderous applause. You smile. This one's clearly a crowd favorite. A fringe tidbit. There were entire pamphlets circulated in Rome that parodied medical tracts praising cabbage as the cure for laziness, bad singing, and even the inability to balance one's ledgers. Historians aren't sure how many people believed these mock guides or if some government officials secretly endorsed them just to keep farmers happy. Speaking of historians, here's our scholarly debate moment. Some scholars argue whether the extreme cabbage obsession was truly empire-wide or mainly exaggerated in surviving texts. After all, preservation bias means we mostly hear from literate elites who were often satirists or critics. Could it be that most Romans just ate cabbage now and then without turning it into a lifestyle? Hard to say. But what we do know is that even serious Roman historians like Pliny the Elder couldn't help but devote entire sections to this vegetable, quoting older writers who claimed cabbage healed ulcers, scorpion stings, and broken hearts. Back in the tavern, the final performer of the night steps up. He's tall, nervous, and clutching a scroll that looks far too long for comfort. He clears his throat. A farmer once told me, "Cabbage cures the soul." So I married one. It never spoke, but my mother liked it. Silence. Then a snort. Then the whole room erupts in sleepy, wine-soaked giggles. It's not the best joke of the night, but after 3 hours of leafy humor, everyone's feeling generous. You leave the taberna under the flickering oil lamps of the street, walking past vendors, packing up their goods jugs of vinegar, baskets of pine nuts, bundles of herbs. One woman still sells cabbage leaves wrapped in fig paper, advertising them as sleep pads for insomniacs. You chuckle. Maybe she's onto something. After all, there's something oddly comforting about an entire empire that once believed their most powerful medicine, beauty treatment, political metaphor, and punchline could grow in a ditch beside a goat pen. And if cabbage got roasted a little too hard tonight, don't worry. Tomorrow, the poets might go after lentils. You're standing in the middle of a chaotic Roman forum, your sandals barely dodging a stampede of toga-clad citizens who, for reasons known only to the gods and the grain accountants, are fighting over what appears to be cabbage. Not gold, not grain, not garum fish, sauce cabbage. One merchant waves a leaf the size of a bedsheet and yells, 5 denarii, or I walk. Another pushes a cart of suspiciously stiff cabbage heads and whispers, fresh from Hispania, which is code for I glued some leaves onto rocks. Welcome to the cabbage bubble, the economy that vast and fussy web of Roman trade supply routes and bribery had somehow become entangled with a humble vegetable. You thought the tulip mania in 17th century Holland was odd, try Rome, where cabbage inflation became a minor yet memorable historical footnote. Some historians speculate, though no one agrees on the exact timeline, that by the late 1st century AD cabbage demand outpaced even olives and lentils in certain provinces. It didn't help that emperors were still pushing cabbage like wellness influencers, pushing detox teas. When Emperor Galba claimed he survived a political purge thanks to his daily cabbage broth, the price of cabbage tripled in 3 cities. That's right. Rome's entire commodity index shivered because a man in a purple robe said he felt less bloated. Naturally, this created opportunity. Where there's hype, there's hustle. Enter the cabbage counterfeiters. You see one now, a shady vendor in the corner stall, stuffing dyed fig leaves into cabbage form and sealing them with wax. They call it imitation leaf, and it's sweeping the back alleys of the Aventine Hill. Soldiers unaware or simply too tired to care are eating it by the bowlful. Reports of stomach cramps are rising. The Senate, of course, forms a subcommittee. Economists? Yes, the Roman Empire had those, though they were mostly just tax officials with opinions start raising alarms. Cabbage volatility threatens grain stability, one scroll reads. Another warns overcultivation of cabbage in Gaul risks depleting vineyard labor. One senator even proposes a tax on cabbage speculation. His speech is drowned out by cabbages being thrown at him from the gallery. Now, let's talk price. A modest head of cabbage that once cost one as a basic Roman coin now sells for half a denarius in downtown Rome. That's the price of a good leather sandal or 2 pitchers of watered-down wine. Bakers complain they can't get slaves to carry flour because they're all outgrowing cabbage in rooftop gardens. A few aristocrats install cabbage fountains, faux decorative installations made of stone, not unlike modern lawn gnomes, only more edible. And of course, no bubble would be complete without cabbage futures. In one notorious incident, a speculative trader in Ostia promised to deliver 1,000 cabbage heads by midsummer. When midsummer came, he delivered goats painted green. That man now lives in exile somewhere near Carthage, possibly still painting goats. The real winners in all this, the humble scribes. You see them now in the back of the forum taking meticulous notes on cabbage prices, supply reports from Egypt, and new recipes like pickled cabbage in squid ink. Because where there's economic confusion, there are bureaucrats ready to document it into eternity. But perhaps the most astonishing development was the rise of cabbage-backed loans. Yes, actual currency loans with cabbage as collateral. If you couldn't repay your debt, your lender got your garden harvest. One unlucky equestrian noble defaulted and had to hand over an entire orchard of cabbage to his cousin, sparking a family feud so fierce it ended in a duel over soup rights. Historians still argue whether this cabbage surge represented a true economic crisis or just a ridiculous episode inflated by a few satirical scrolls. One scroll from the poet Lucilius suggests the entire panic was engineered by cabbage farmers tired of wheat's popularity. Another scholar claims it was part of an imperial food policy, aimed at curbing wine production by filling bellies with fibrous greens instead. Either way, you start to feel the ridiculousness settle into your bones. You wander into a shadowy alley where an old woman is selling cabbage-themed charms, little bronze cabbages said to bring luck in trade. You buy one because why not? You're already deep in a city where vegetables are treated like gods, debt is settled with leaves, and street fights break out over poorly pickled goods. And even as the economy sways and creaks under the pressure of too much fiber, Rome marches on. Gladiators fight. Philosophers argue. Cabbage prices wobble like a drunk senator on temple steps. And beneath it all, the city hums the smell of whetstone, the soft rustle of togas, and the ever-present crunch of cabbage being chewed by someone who swears it will cure their gout. You're standing under a fading Roman sunset, watching merchants pack away their carts as the scent of grilled onions and faintly sour cabbage wafts through the forum air. But something's off. The cabbage piles aren't towering like they used to. In fact, most stalls seem to be pushing spices now, saffron, pepper, cinnamon, all recently arrived via long and treacherous trade routes. It's not just a change in cuisine, it's a cultural shift. The age of cabbage is dying. You wander into a dinner party hosted by a senator named Marcellus, once a proud cabbage connoisseur. He used to extol the virtues of raw cabbage for digestion and boiled cabbage for contemplation. Now, he's sprinkling crushed cinnamon on imported Persian pears and has swapped his famous cabbage salad for a fig tart infused with something called garum foam. It's a culinary betrayal. You poke the fig tart with your spoon and can almost hear the ghosts of Cato and Claudius sighing in disappointment. What happened? Well, Rome got rich, very rich. The empire's reach now stretches from Britannia to Egypt to Mesopotamia, and with it comes a flood of luxuries. Where once boiled cabbage in a clay bowl satisfied emperors and commoners alike, now culinary fashion demands the rarest, weirdest ingredients. Historians still argue whether the cabbage's fall from grace was due to class dynamics, dietary fatigue, or simply the arrival of spices with better Instagram potential if Instagram had existed in the 1st century, of course. One record describes Emperor Marcus Aurelius, famous for his Stoic philosophies and his surprisingly messy beard, trying a dish called murina, stuffed with saffroned mouse liver. He didn't enjoy it, but he didn't ask for cabbage either. The leaf, once medicinal, military, and majestic, was quietly disappearing from elite menus. Even the servants at the Palatine Hill noticed it fewer cabbage scraps to sweep up fewer leaves to pickle for imperial winter rations. At the local level, though, not everyone was ready to say goodbye. You find yourself in a tiny countryside villa where a grandmother still grates cabbage into barley soup and whispers, "This will settle your stomach and your soul." It's soothing and familiar. Her granddaughter, however, prefers honeyed date balls and won't touch anything green unless it's been candied or imported. Generational cabbage gap. Very real. But the real nail in the cabbage coffin came not from palate fatigue, but from foreign imports and status games. Cabbage was too domestic, too humble. New elite gardens in Rome's suburbs weren't growing cabbages anymore. They were cultivating peacocks and tiny finicky fruits that grew only under specific moonlight conditions. It became a thing to not eat what your grandfather ate, especially if your grandfather fought in the cabbage-loving legions of Gaul. Emperors wanted mystery on their plates. So, Cabbage, a known sturdy friend, was ghosted. There was even a brief moment of Cabbage counterculture. You stumble into a dimly lit tavern near the Tiber, where old philosophers, slightly drunk and very bitter, gather to eat raw cabbage leaves out of solidarity. They call themselves cabbagists. They chant in Latin hold-up leaf-shaped mugs and grumble about how society has lost its fiber literally and metaphorically. One gets emotional describing a boiled cabbage that got him through a long siege. You politely chew your leaf and nod along, though it's incredibly bitter and makes your gums itch. By now, even cabbage's medicinal reputation has slipped. Roman physicians begin favoring imported minerals and strange flower oils for healing. One physician, Galen, still believes in cabbage's value, but he also experiments with eel paste and powdered emeralds. He's not exactly helping the Cabbage brand. There are still glimmers of devotion. In isolated villages, cabbage remains sacred. A retired legionary, toothless but proud, shares his story of using cabbage poultices to heal battle wounds in Dacia. "Never let them tell you garlic is better," he mumbles as he gently pats a steaming bowl of cabbage stew like it's a pet. Back in Rome, though, it's clear cabbage is no longer trending. Banquets grow more ostentatious. A dessert made of milk gold leaf and fermented peacock egg yolk becomes the talk of the capital. No one wants to hear about humble greens anymore. And when Emperor Commodus hosts his famously extravagant feast of mirrors, where each guest is seated opposite their reflection and eats food dyed to match their toga, there isn't a single shred of cabbage in sight. You lean against a pillar outside the villa, listening to the distant sounds of a feast, laughter, harp music, and the occasional cough from a guest reacting to cinnamon-snorted oysters. It's clear that cabbage has gone out of style. The leaf that once ruled Rome now sits forgotten in backyard plots and old herbal scrolls. The city still functions. People still eat. But something earthy is missing. You're seated in a dimly lit triclinium, the final light of an orange Roman dusk slanting through latticed windows, casting stripes of warm shadow across the walls. The room is quiet, not with ceremony, but with resignation. The marble table in front of you holds a simple dish, a cabbage salad, nothing more. No garum, no peppercorns, no overzealous honey drizzle. Just cabbage torn by hand, like it's always been. The last of Rome's cabbage-loving emperors sits beside you. Not grand like Augustus, nor mad like Caligula, he's a man more forgotten than remembered. His name is hard to pronounce. His statues are dusty. His bust was used last week to prop open a palace door. But in his hands he still holds a small bowl and reverence for the humble leaf that he insists has kept him alive this long. He sighs, deeply, and starts talking as if you've been here for years. You know, he mutters, stirring the leaves with a spoon made of tarnished silver. They all mocked me. Said cabbage was for slaves, for farmers, for philosophers with weak stomachs. He pauses, chewing, loudly. But who needed figs shipped from Carthage? When this he lifts a single damp strand of boiled leaf, has everything fiber. Fortitude, flatulence, control. You blink. He leans back. The fire crackles. My father swore by cabbage poultices, he says. Wrapped his ankles in them before gladiator games. Never sprained a thing in his life. My mother, she slept with pickled cabbage beside the bed. Said the scent warded off evil dreams. He chuckles. Or possibly just my father. You smile because you've heard enough cabbage folk remedies by now to write a 12-volume scroll. He turns solemn. Historians still argue whether my cabbage policies bankrupted the Navy, but I say what good is a fleet when your people are constipated? You nod. This feels important. As the evening deepens, his memories wander. He tells you about the garden behind the Palatine Hill, where he used to sneak away from politics and just dig his hands into the soil. Not for olives or dates, no. He nurtured cabbages. Rows and rows of them. Different shapes, some purple, some the size of a toddler's head. He named them, talked to them, claimed one saved his life during a thunderstorm. Another supposedly predicted a tax rebellion. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he just needed someone or something that didn't talk back. In the quiet pause between his stories, you hear the sounds of the city drifting in merchants bartering below a distant harpist, plucking something melancholic and the echo of sandals against cobblestones. Life goes on. Empires shift. Tastes change. But the emperor sits here one last time with a leaf of cabbage and a lifetime of memories. He offers you a bite. You decline. He smiles. Smart. You'll live longer without it. And just like that, the story winds down. The bowl is empty now. The candle burns low. And the emperor, once mighty, once ridiculed, rests back into his chair, not with regret, but with a cabbage-scented peace only he could truly understand.